Let's see what's going on here. All right. There's a lot of cup activity. I dropped the call. A buddy of mine called in, and I'm going to have him call in, and I'm going to explain to him. You guys can hear our conversation. I'm going to explain to him what happened when I was up in the Capitol. I was part of what I'm calling the third breach. I don't know if there were more breaches, but there were at least 3. Oh man, so a bunch of cop cars just went by. But let's see if he calls in. I don't know how to do this one. Let's see. So a bunch of cars just went by. I lost the last group. I was in the middle of the story. I look like Lou Diamond Phillips. Thank you. Thank you. I lost the last group. We had a couple hundred people on, and the stream died. My phone died. But we're here outside the Capitol. The count does resume in the Capitol. And what was I talking about just then? We had all these great comments that I hadn't addressed, and then poof, it's gone. But I was talking about just how treacherous it was up there on the scaffolding. And if you go to my Twitter at JLeeQuinn, I'm Jeremy Lee Quinn. If you go to my Twitter, you'll be able to see some of the video from when I was up on the scaffolding, just how tightly people were packed. It was definitely like a critical mass thing where someone asked, is this going to happen again tomorrow? It took so much energy, and the crowd was so hyped up by the president. So really you do have to put responsibility on the president. He's the one who billed this as the wild march, was it? So he's not without, let's see. Hold up one second. I was going to have a guest call in. Let me see if this works. Here he is. He's a guest, so I'm going to bring him in. This is JFOD. He is coming to us. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
You're breaking up, buddy. Are you on a good
How about now?
do you have a good connection?
I do have a good connection, yeah. I should.
You're not coming into me. I'm coming into you, okay? I hear you're all blurry to me.
Hold on.
Why don't you disconnect and let's try one more time.
Okay.
A little technical difficulty here. Let's disconnect you and then try to get on. He's blocking his cam. Yeah, that's I don't think he wants to be on. Do you?
I'll be on.
You don't want to be on, do you?
It doesn't matter that much.
We just want to be able to hear him.
There you go. Hey, what's up, everybody?
Now we see you.
Cool.
Yo, are you? I can't hear you for shit, dude.
What if I call you?
No, maybe it's my connection. Can you disconnect and connect one more time? What I want to do is John is a political commentator. He's John from Redacted Tonight, and I was going to give him the report just as a conversation to him and tell him what I saw up there, how it was part of the third breach of the Capitol. There were several breaches over a couple of hours. How it was packed in, what I saw. A guy ran up to me and he said, "Hey, you want to?" You can see it on the 5 p.m. live stream. Let's see. Here we go. Let's see if this works.
How about now? How's this working?
Yes, there we go. Now we got you. We're good.
All right, cool.
So
and yeah, for everybody, yeah. So I want to just listen to you, But
okay.
If I have any thoughts or questions, I'll chime in here and there.
Let's have a discussion. Let's do that. So I was just telling these folks that I was part of what I consider to be the third breach. There were several breaches into the actual Capitol, and I was in the last breach because then after they got the group that I was reporting on and following, after they did a bunch of flashbangs and tear gas and got everybody out, then they pretty much had the Capitol cleared, and then they resumed the session of Congress in which they are going through the electoral votes, and they tried to throw out the Arizona votes. That failed, and so business is continuing. Just you know, a couple 100 yards away from me at the Capitol, right there. But what questions do you have, John?
Well, first, so with that third breach, were you inside the Capitol building?
Yes, we were in two offices. So what happened is a guy came up to me, big bushy beard, and he's like, "You want to make history?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know if I do." That sounds. No. He's like, "You want to make history?" He's like, "You're a journalist, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, come on." And so big bushy beard guy takes me in, and he gives like a rousing speech. They've broken out the windows to an office, and he perches in the window and he gives this rousing speech where he's like, "All right, everybody, this moment, it's one of those just freedom speeches." Because all right, I think we need new words for what was going on. This was kind of an anarcho-patriot thing. In other words, I saw very much anarcho-libertarian vibes, that people want small government, anti-globalization. The Trump phenomenon on the surface is characterized by the media in all these different ways. But these folks are really against government overreach. They're against COVID restrictions, and they are essentially libertarians. And that's how I would characterize the folks that I saw. You want to know what had nobody mentioned the whole time? Race. Nothing. Everybody's fixated on race with Trump, and none of these people did. There were, it was obviously predominantly white, but that's not what this was about. This is about anti-globalization, essentially.
Well, I mean, from their perspective, there was a ton of election fraud, and the election was stolen. From their perspective, Corona is this overblown thing, and these lockdowns are a small business genocide. From their perspective, globalized forces have destroyed the middle class and carved out the working class jobs in this country. And it seems like everything kind of came to a head, and they went berserker style today. Now, something that's been so interesting about your coverage has been that when you first set out on this thing, you were there to find these white nationalists, right?
Yeah. So I thought that white supremacists were sabotaging Black Lives Matter. So I went on a mission. When I went to Tulsa on June the 20th, I thought that was going to be when the Trump people were going to be bragging about how they sabotaged Black Lives Matter and helped instigate the riots. I thought that the anarchist elements were from the right. What I found out eventually, of course, is that the anarchist elements are from the left, that the anti-fascist movement is very left. And I didn't realize that. I was going out to find whoever was agitating the riots and making them accelerate into destructive actions. Because I didn't think, there's just a lot to unpack back then in June, and I didn't know where it was going to go. But what I eventually found, of course, was revolutionary politics was very fertile on the left over the last 33 years as part of anti-fascism in the United States.
Interesting. And you talk specifically about the insurrectionist anarchists out of the Pacific Northwest, and how they have sort of expanded and are all over the country and kind of show up at all of these rallies.
Yeah, well, it's not just the Pacific Northwest. The ones, the folks, it's part of the Midwest as well. Minneapolis has this huge anarchist presence. They're still occupying what is called George Floyd Square. And George Floyd Square is an autonomous zone outside Cup Foods, which is the where George Floyd was killed. and they're still occupying a 2-block radius residential and mixed commercial area where it's a no cop zone. They have barricades up and it's spray painted "fuck off cops," and maybe I'll post some of that, sort of an epilogue to all of this. But they have checkpoints, and they have maintained this occupation in Minneapolis with, I think, very little coverage other than maybe a article here and there, one PBS piece. But the anarchist history in Minneapolis is deep. In fact, if you want to talk about the first Black Bloc riot, it was in Germany in 1982. Ronald Reagan came to visit Germany. The West German youth, there was a big squatters movement, and the West German youth were disenfranchised. Not only that, they had propaganda coming in from the East that was pro-communist and anti-capitalist. So there were these anti-capitalist riots in which they went after Reagan and called him a fascist. They were anti-fascist riots. And they dressed all in black. Some of them had helmets on. They rioted against police. And I posted some video on my Twitter of this. You'd have to dig a couple days back. But if you look at my Twitter, at JLeeQuinn, I have Super 8 video of those riots. Those Black Bloc tactics, the modern tactics, they have been developed ever since then in the revolutionary politics side of the left, in leftist politics. So much so that my anarchist source from the Midwest said he was recruited in the anarcho-punk scene. You know, people would go and fight neo-Nazis in the late 80s and early 90s. In the anarcho-punk scene, you would have anti-racist skinheads and neo-Nazi skinheads, and they would go up against each other and they'd fight turf wars over venues because, you know, sometimes a white supremacist band would come in and then the anti-racists would come and they'd fight, you know, or vice versa. The neo-Nazis would show up at other people's shows. So that was the late 80s in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The first band, if you guys want to Google this, the first gang was called the Baldies. And it was 7 guys. They later expanded into a network called Anti-Racist Action. The Anti-Racist Action Network was active all through the 90s. And then they dissipated in the late 90s. You have the Patriot Act and you have 9/11 and stuff. Then they reform as Torch Antifa. And Torch Antifa is the biggest Antifa network. Rose City Antifa was formed in 2007 in Portland. So Portland and Minneapolis have had this sister city connection in revolutionary politics for years, going back to the late 80s and Anti-Racist Action.
Okay. And that is, I mean, all that is incredibly interesting. What I want to, and yeah, and I see the Capitol building in the background. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to ask you, and it's interesting. It's somebody left a comment kind of similar to what I wanted to ask, because of you going around the country and finding out that a lot of the infiltration of the BLM protests and stuff like that has actually come from anarchists on the left. Would you definitely say that today the people who stormed the Capitol, this was definitely MAGA country, or as someone says here, did Antifa wear Patriot colors today and lead the breach of the Capitol?
So that's certainly, can't rule that out, but this was a rightist movement, much like the Minneapolis police precinct was a leftist movement. This was a rightist, but you can't rule out some crossover. And one thing that I said this was kind of a narco patriot. There are anarcho-libertarians that go back and forth, that don't give a damn about, if you're an anarchist and you're anti-statist, it doesn't matter. Would it matter to you much if you're at a right-wing insurrection or a left-wing insurrection? And And the Boogaloo is a perfect example of that. The Boogaloo is not necessarily just a far-right movement. And I explained in the last live cast that basically what happened was the Boogaloo, you had some Boogaloo guys that were in Minneapolis at the sacking of the 3rd precinct. One of them fired his gun at the precinct and he yelled out justice for George Floyd. Another one tried to sell arms to Hamas, and they were all networked. So they were non-affiliated, or at least left-leaning in their sympathies. Would it be possible that those types of folks would have been in there today? Absolutely. You know, the Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot, the guy had an anarchist flag behind him. So he was kind of a right libertarian anarchist who was anti-communist. So, you know, there's all of these different affiliations, and you have some crossover. So would it be fair to say that there were some folks probably at the front that were anarchist leaning? Yes. But Antifa is a different thing. Antifa is a definite, solid, politically left social justice thing, where you have the pronouns, where you socially authoritarian, you cancel people, you dox them and you cancel them and you call them racist. That's a very left thing, the Antifa thing. The anarchist thing, though, can cross over. And that's the difference between the black flag and the red flag. The red flag is social revolution and social authoritarianism, in my opinion. But the black flag of anarchy can cross over. And I think that there are folks that do that. We saw people with Guy Fawkes masks, you know, and who are just deep in V for Vendetta and stuff. So in a pop culture anarchy sense, or an intellectual classical anarchist sense, it doesn't matter. An insurrection's an insurrection, you know?
Yeah. Now, in terms of, okay, so I've heard theories about this, all of these things that are happening on a number of different fronts, being framed as a color revolution that's actually happening in our country underneath our noses without us knowing, as in the same tactics that our government has used in, say, Eastern Europe to overthrow certain governments to get to turn them into client states for us, to have presidents that are conducive to what we want for our foreign policy there. In order to do that, it's important to kind of destabilize the country in a number of ways. And one of the ways to do that is to undermine the populace's confidence in electoral integrity and stuff like that. Do you have any sense of something like that happening in this country?
From what I can tell, the rage, the critical mass, and the rage on each side is that people feel disenfranchised enough. And this is what I said about the 3rd precinct as well. When you have enough critical mass and enough people like you had, thousands that are animated in the same way, it feels organic to me. Now, is the cause organic? I mean, look, Trump gave a rousing speech before all this happened and essentially sent the people on their way. He called it the wild protest, right? And he set it up. He gave a speech in the comfort of where he was at the Ellipse, you know, on the other side of the mall, this area here. He gave this rousing speech and sent tens of thousands of people off to the Capitol for their wild protest, and they lived up to it. You know, they were wild. They went hard.
Yeah.
They went hard. You know, the thing that's funny, it's not funny, but some leftists are genuinely competitive and saying that, you know, the cops went easy on them and this is just white privilege and so forth. But they don't understand that the people went hard, and there were old ladies and like mothers and stuff that were just, they're serious about, what we're dealing with across the board is a distrust of our systems, whether it's the media, because there was just as much protest against big tech and of the media. Those currents in the anger were equal to the anger against the government and the Democrats. So I would say that essentially there's enough real raw emotion and distrust. You know, the MAGA folks as a grievance feel that they've been called racist for 4 years and they've been essentially disenfranchised, and they gravitated to Trump no matter what you think of him, for what they believe to be authentic reasons. Now, I myself consider that guy someone who would just say anything, and it worked. There was something that they were looking for. They thought he was their guy. When I was in Tulsa, this one religious group, the guy was on the megaphone and he said, Donald Trump, he may not be a man of God, but he's God's man right now. And it was like,
That's interesting. Well, yeah. I mean, if you've been fucked over by the two establishment parties for decades, you've lost all sorts of job. You're basically, your integrity's been undermined. You've been lied to. You've been, let's say there's winners and losers in globalization. You're one of the losers. You finally have somebody who at least presents that they're standing up for you. And then your other choice is at the time is Hillary Clinton, someone who is complete embodiment of the establishment. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. But somebody asked an interesting question here in the comments. He said, absent of that speech by Donald Trump, do you contend that this wouldn't have happened?
I don't think it would have. People have jobs to go back to. I was talking to a conservative blogger and he was characterizing it as such. He said, I don't think they'll come right back. They may not even come back for inauguration. This is going to be a tough one to top. Let's be honest. They made a much bigger, if you're talking about competitive rioting, this was bigger than anything that the left did. And I think the left,
even like Minneapolis.
Well, the Capitol?
Yeah, I know. And got inside.
And got inside to the United States Capitol? I mean, they didn't want to burn it. There's also conflicting emotions here. Maybe some people did, but some people on their way out were actually, yelling at the police and then they'd thank them. Like it was this weird, it's this weird thing where they do still believe in this country. They're very patriotic. Somebody says today seemed more QAnon heavy than MAGA. How do you compare Antifa to QAnon? The QAnon stuff.
Can I say something about QAnon first?
Yeah.
In my assessment and a lot of people's assessment, QAnon is an intelligence agency operation. It is a psyop. It's a psychological operation that has such crazy conspiracy stuff in it. But what it does is it pulls in a lot of other conspiracy stuff that is real or at least has merit into looking into in order to dismiss all of it. The same with Pizzagate. In my assessment, Pizzagate and QAnon are both psychological operations by the intelligence community.
All right, let's hold that. Let's table that because you and I are not going to be able to really agree on that because I'll just put it. Let's just put it there.
I do want to push you off of your objectivity ledge, by the way.
Yeah, go for it.
Very, very much. No, in the assessment that I think at this point in time, with so much misinformation going on out there, someone like yourself who is on the ground, I think it would be a service to the people who are following you that you give your assessment and your opinion. Like objectivism is bullshit.
Yeah, no, I understand that point of view. And look, I'll let you push me into an opinion. There are two things that I'm doing when you're streaming and when you're podcasting. I think it's important to give an opinion. When I do publicreport.org, I give you just pure, uncut, raw facts.
I think that's very fair, and I think that's. I agree with you.
So if you want to go to publicreport.org and look back all the way to Minneapolis, you're going to get, unless I say, okay, I'm giving you an opinion here, you're going to get pretty an even look at stuff. But one thing that people don't realize is there's so much subculture. Even you just mentioned QAnon. That's a subculture. That's a subcultural movement. And when people ask, well, who are the people here? I saw moms. I saw at one point someone was like, there's family, there's children here. Don't shake the rafters. Because we were on these. If you go to my Twitter, you guys, please follow me on Twitter. I'm at J Lee Quinn. And I have all this stuff on there, which is of people on the rafters, which people were Spider-Manning their way up these construction rafters to get up there, because people don't realize you can't just walk up the steps here. You can't just walk up steps. There was everything was blocked off and you had to scale these, different walls and stuff. It's not accessible like state capitals where you can just walk right up. So people were literally scaling, and you'll see that on my Twitter, the video, numerous clips of people scaling the construction rafters. And at one point they started shaking them, and it was like, oh my God, I was like, I got to get off this thing.
I'll tell you real quick.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So a few years, let's say, I guess it was probably 2017. I was in DC, and I covered a rally where people marched. People marched from Philadelphia to DC to then go and voluntarily get arrested at the Capitol building in a peaceful protest in order to protest against loss of voter rights and against money in politics. And literally over 1,000 people got arrested, but it was completely all peacefully done. And like the Capitol Police and everything like there, everybody was completely a professional about it. Like Lee Camp, the host of the show that I was on, he went and got arrested as well in solidarity with these folks. And it was such a different energy and such a different feel from what went on today that it seems like even in just a few years, the escalation that has happened in this country and the divide has become so much greater. And I think it's the media's fault. I largely blame the media. And I personally don't see much difference between the corporate media, the big corporations, and the government. I think it's all the same thing. I don't think there are checks. I don't think there is a fourth estate in terms of mainstream media. That's why journalists like yourself are so important. But with all of these different groups, Donald Trump was the perfect person to have as president for a few years, the perfect person that can be presented as this completely heinous entity to certain groups and this completely messianic entity to other groups. And I think his presidency and the manipulation of it by the media has accelerated us to where we're at.
I would agree with that. I mean, I have a completely different understanding of Trump supporters since I went to prove that they were the white supremacists that were out agitating Black Lives Matter. And once I got to understand who these MAGA folks are, what their concerns are, how they feel disenfranchised, how they're sick and tired of being called racist for 4 years and white supremacists and so on. I can give you somewhat of an opinion in saying that I felt safer amongst the MAGA crowd as much as they were rioting than I have at leftist crowds. And that's because the leftist stuff is a little like, look, this wasn't unhinged, but the leftists can turn on their own. They can attack people. This was not directed to attack people. They were making a statement against the Capitol and about, they were not trying to attack somebody else. And what happens in the leftist movement, I'll give you this opinion, very, very is it becomes social authoritarian. You're with us. You have to think like, it's not enough to be left. You have to be left like us. If you don't, you're part of the problem or you're a racist. People who are on the right have a live and let live attitude about them. They're not there to suppress anybody. These are libertarian folks at heart. So, when you talk about, there's all these subcultures, which is, QAnon and Boogaloo even, or Proud Boys, MAGA. But I would say that the Don't Tread on Me, you see the Gadsden flag a lot, that they're constitutionalists, and so you heard oath breakers a lot. They were yelling at the police that they're being oath breakers. The Constitution plays in a lot as far as their beliefs and the aversion to government overreach. And with COVID restrictions and what they believe to be an incoming administration that is going to allow more government overreach, so much so where the far left of our country right now is demanding all these social issues be resolved by government overreach. And that's what they really don't want. They don't want to get into a state where, we have to bend the knees, so to speak, to these social issues. We have to use this particular language that the far leftists are insisting on. And so when you go into a leftist revolt like this, you don't know. The folks here aren't there to get their grievance out by turning on another person and beating them. But in Portland, we saw that. We saw that there were these rage attacks over people that were perceived to be against Black Lives Matter, against, leftist ideology. And so it's a lot more volatile, I would say. And, they would respond to that. Well, that's because you're a fascist, or something.
I think that you're right in terms of a lot of these folks are constitutionalists, and that's very, very important.
On the right. Yeah. On the right.
Yeah. Like I remember I was covering one of a Republican presidential primary on the campus of the University of Colorado in Boulder, and there were a number of like older white people who were there and were Ben Carson supporters, And I asked them why, and they said because he's a constitutionalist, straight up. So in that respect, it goes to show that it's a simplistic narrative just to reflexively call them all racist and then be dismissive of them.
Yeah, no, and the media has done it so consistently, even on like leftist Twitter. All the comments from people on the left are about, well, if this was black people, they would have gotten, blah, blah. And there were black people in the group up there. Obviously, it's predominantly white. But, we get into this state on the left of comparative sort of who's what I'm talking about? Like they're just saying, well, this wouldn't have happened if it was the left or that, or they were nice to them, because they just let them walk in and out. It wasn't the case.
No,
they had to be gassed and pushed out, just like the left. They went hard, and part of the reason I said that they went hard is they saw what the left got away with. And I always said, all of this is going to eventually boomerang back to the other side. What happens when the next administration comes in and a whole new group feels disenfranchised, and they say, well, this new administration is coming in support of this group that was allowed to pursue these techniques for 7 months straight of social disruption. Well, we're going to do that too.
Well, there's that, but also I think that, but the news media is going to cover it, all of those groups, as being domestic white nationalist terrorists. That's like how the narrative is going to change from Russiagate for 4 years to now it's going to change back to war stuff. It's going to change back to terrorism, an element of Islamic terrorism, but now it's going to go to domestic terrorism. That's what certain journalists see as trending and as things are going to change. And I see it already happening. But all of this stuff to me is just divides, just left-right divides, just all of these different wedge issues. To me, all of them are contrived to keep us turned against each other while we are getting so much wealth extracted from us. We're getting so much more corporate consolidation as they've been able to take advantage of the pandemic. All of these there's a small business genocide happening in this country while big corporations are making record profits. It's going to be so fucking hard to separate from, to roll that back. I mean, things are potentially getting so fucked up that there's going to continue to be a presentation of pandemics happening in a feedback loop with climate change that are going to completely repress a lot of aspects of our freedom. There's so much of a push for everything to be digitized, for our lives to be digitized, for us to be separated, for the idea of people being together in real life, which is evolutionarily such an important aspect of why we've been able to thrive in this society. All of that stuff is getting rolled back. And if we want to fight against it, we really need to get together across this left-right divide, but we're very separated.
Let me address that. There are several points that people can see beyond what I call jets. What was that? Jets, sharks
and jets. Yeah.
Sharks and jets. If we could get beyond sharks and jets from West Side Story, I hosted a live stream. I'm new to this. I hosted a live stream on New Year's Eve with a Black Lives Matter chapter leader from Utah and a Proud Boys chapter leader who became friends. The media totally buried the story because they announced that they jointly are against white supremacy, because all the myths about the Proud Boys. A lot of it has been total, bullshit to say that they're white supremacists and so forth. And so, and a lot of that is social justice, leftist propaganda that has come into play. And it's been and the media has just jumped on that. But basically, they came up with 6 different things that they agreed on. And the school to prison pipeline, get big money out of politics, reform police, deal with a housing crisis. They had all of these. They had about 6 points. If you guys go to Unblocked Podcast, that's my podcast. You see the logo over John's head there. That's Unblocked Podcast. If you go to Unblocked Podcast, you'll see that conversation. That's episode 4. And they came up with 6 things that they agree on. And then there's 2 more on top of that, especially getting big money out of politics. So, when you talk about the 99%, if we could just get out of this Jets Sharks thing with the Republican and Democrat cultural identifications and focus on what we want, we're at a prime moment for a third party paradigm shift right now. And I think that that's what I've seen. And whenever I say that, some people get it, but some people are so stuck in what they want to blame. And maybe that'll change after the 20th of January when we have new administration. I want to address a couple of these questions. Oh, one thing I meant to say is that the German Black Bloc, the Germans came and met with leftist revolutionary groups in the early 90s, and they taught Black Bloc tactics. Their first stop, according to my anarchist source in the Midwest, who was used to roll in the anarcho-punk scene and get into street fights, he said the first stop that they went to give these Black Bloc workshops was Minneapolis in the early 90s. The second stop was Portland. So it's really interesting, this thread of revolutionary politics on the left. This is all new on the right in a mass sense. I mean, we haven't seen this kind of rightist activism before. People asking, are the downtown streets empty? Yes, they are. There's just a couple of cop cars and stuff, but a curfew went in effect at 6 p.m. A lot of people at the Trump hotels there's been a little paranoia because they haven't been allowed to leave their hotels. And a lot of them were worried that was going to be some sort of mass arrest kind of thing. I talked to a blogger who was concerned about that. But some people are allowed out of their hotels to just smoke and stuff. But some, I guess one hotel he was staying, they wouldn't even let people outside to smoke, which was a little crazy. Got another question. Thoughts on the idea that the cops are mostly comprised of right-wingers, thus more sympathetic. I don't think that's big enough issue. I don't think we have enough proof of that. I don't think that the cops, when I've been in the Portland riots, I didn't see differentiation. Quite frankly, those Portland kids are handled with kid gloves. They've gotten away with a lot for months, the Portland rioters, because they're so consistent of doing it night and night after again in the techniques. Yeah, this guy named Robert Evans, he's a Portland embedded leftist reporter. I said they basically took the techniques that you guys have been developing over 7 months, and they went big because they had the leadership, and they just went all out in one strike. He got pissed off at me. And a lot of his followers, he's one of these guys with thousands of followers and stuff. I challenged him to a debate weeks ago, and he responded. He was interested. And then I told him I wanted to contrast me as a guy who's going from both sides, trying to be objective, with him that's embedded. And right now, the problem is, in my opinion, and maybe he didn't want to debate me because I would have said this eventually, is we have too many embedded reporters. We have too many reporters. It's okay to have an opinion, like you said, but it's another thing to be doing embedded propaganda for a certain for one side, in my opinion. But
Absolutely. I feel like it's for you to actually, and we've talked a bunch of times, and you've opened my eyes to a different perspective on stuff. And initially there was some cognitive dissonance on my end because, and there must have been on yours as well initially, but it's like, it's not a popular thing for you to be bouncing around and saying, hey, wait a second, this isn't happening. This isn't the right. You know what I mean?
Well, I get people from the right and left hating my coverage. I mean, I'll publish a conversation and then I'll get hateful comments, and I can't tell if they're the right or the left, just because at times they blend together and they just don't like that I'm just telling it down the middle. So sometimes I'm making, the Proud Boys, unilaterally attacked an Antifa group, and we hadn't seen a lot of that last time on December the 12th. And it was a right-wing videographer who captured that, and he was very torn by it. And this guy named Villain, and he calls it as it is as well, even though he leans right. I lean left, and I admit that in my perspective, and that's why I try to have dialogue. That's why you don't see me going on, the conservative. I said no to Fox News when they invited me on. I just said no because I've seen it ruin so many people that have gone into it, and then the left won't talk to them after they go on Fox News. So I said it's not worth it. I'm not going on Fox News, even though I have all this information about the riots and so forth. Someone writes, "God bless the patriots who voted Trump out of office." But you said as far as pushing me to opinion, I think I'm a little more loose on this podcast, live stream broadcast about opinions.
I think it's. I was like just being somewhat cheeky with you. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Don't worry about it. You give plenty of. I think you give the right balance of opinion and commentary, and then when it's journalism and it's just like, let's get these facts out, I think you do a good job with that in a more objective sense, which is important because people are not getting this information. You know what I mean? And even if the truth is not what we want to hear, it's important to get it out there so we can't be manipulated. I think we're so easily manipulated by corporate media to be turned against each other because every day we're getting the same stories, but with purposefully highly antagonistic narratives. And if you just pay attention to one or the other echo chamber, when the outcome of that is you're necessarily going to be turned against that other half of the country. And it really sucks. And it's very, very clear that it's just very clear at this point. But I think, and we haven't, and this is a whole other thing and something that I want to talk to you about off air, but I'll mention it here now because I'm not trying to keep anything secret, is I really think that this pandemic is allowing for some global entities, some transnational global capital folks, the transnational global capital Davos people, to try to really heighten and accelerate their agenda, which
this is all Great Reset stuff. A lot of people, a lot of people in there were talking Great Reset. Now, I would need more. That's InfoWars is also.
Just because InfoWars is talking about it doesn't mean we should totally dismiss it because
no. I'm just saying the anti-globalist stuff. I'm saying that's the common thread. In other words, a lot of people are from that cultural media source. And so you had a lot of anti-globalist stuff. But the thing is, talk about anti-globalization, the anarchists are anti-globalists. And they rioted in Seattle in 1999 at the WTO. That was our modern first Black Bloc riot. Then a lot of those techniques were applied towards green anarchism in the 2000s. Before Rose City Antifa was founded in the Pacific Northwest in 2007, you had a lot of tree sits. You had a lot of techniques that were developed by the green anarchists using Black Bloc and other techniques, affinity groups. The books were essentially written on civil disobedience and social uprising from the green anarchist point of view. But it's interesting that these techniques and social revolution, though it originated and was developed on the left, it got passed on to the right. The right was standing there watching this stuff. Those Proud Boys come from the Galen McGuinness, who was the founder, was part of the anarcho-punk scene in Canada. He sang for a band called Anal Chinook. And there's pictures of him back in the day with like the Nazi insignia on his chest crossed out, like to show that he's anti-Nazi. And he was part of that anarcho-punk scene, and he got sick of it because one of the big criticisms that the anarchist who contacted me from the Midwest said is the problem with the anarchist anti-fascist scene is once you run out of neo-Nazis, you start making them up.
Holy shit, he said that to you?
Yeah, he said that's what happens. Next thing you know, you're just going after ordinary Republicans and you're doxing them and trying to, calling up their bosses, trying to get them fired and calling them Nazis.
For me, it ultimately it ultimately breaks down where it doesn't seem like at the end, if any group at the end of the day doesn't seem like it wants unity to fight against the real fucking enemy, then to me these left-right divides, I'm not interested in them anymore.
Yeah.
I feel like this pandemic and what I see certain groups doing, it's actually changed my political calculus on things. Where I'm like, we need to globally get together to push back against this next phase. Like the war on terror has gone by the wayside. Now it's the beginning of the biosecurity state, the medical martial law era. And I know it sounds a little crazy if you don't have context for it, but as I learn more about this stuff, it's hard for me not to want to just find groups that organize against that.
Well, I'll tell you something. Everybody that was in there in that protest has that same point of view that you state. They are very concerned about government overreach. And that's what the left media does not get.
I know that's what sucks. What sucks is a lot of my friends on the left, I think there's a blind spot on this right now. Because basically here's like, for example, I forever was for UBI, Universal Basic Income. And I still am if there's an economy on top of that where people can make their own money. But UBI without an economy on top of that is fucking slavery, because so many strings are going to be attached to what you can do with that money, because government just craves power like that. And I think that the same thing can be said with something like, if it's not done right, let's say we get Medicare for all, but it's completely digitized medicine with all sorts of things where it's hard to actually get to see a doctor and the coverage is really bad. But then on top of that, there's new financial instruments called social impact bonds and human capital markets that use new technologies to be like, okay, this person from their profile and their mental health issues would cost the state this much money. We're going to put this program in place because if they do these things digitally, it should save us this much money. And then the people that, you know, the business that made that financial, that made that entity that made that thing that does that gets money. And then the fucking hedge funds are on top of that, basically betting on people and making a return in that respect. I mean, this is the financial instruments that are potentially coming down the pike. And I think there's this scary thing where us on the left in that progressive movement is getting manipulated and is falling into a trap without knowing it. And I've not thought that until pretty recently, and it's actually fucking with me.
The stuff, you know, I'm from the left. The thing that we don't seem to get is that
somebody just wrote Project Gresham for those curious on crypto UBI. That's interesting. I don't know what Project Gresham is, but anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know what that it is. But no, with the big tech stuff, you know, when you go to California is a perfect, you know, Gavin Newsom's a perfect sort of example of this, is that there's sort of this thing where we just, we don't sort of, gosh, I'm losing my train of thought here, but I just feel like what we're starting to realize is that if there's too much there's too much control in our lives, I think that's what this was about. You know, the California thing, I've seen them protesting COVID restrictions for a long time, and in California, I live in California, and I've come to understand that Newsom's approach isn't accurate for this country, that you have to understand the people who are in your state and the attitudes, and people really feel like the Democrats don't understand when to back off, and they want to control every aspect of people's lives. And that gets scary with the social justice stuff, that you have to use these terms or you get fired from your job because somebody calls up and says you're a bigot, you know? And this stuff comes from us on the left. And we don't really understand that, because I guarantee you a lot of the stuff that's going to be written about this, it's not going to understand, like, how many major media outlets are going to say that they understood that people were protesting against government overreach.
Yeah, you're very rarely going to hear that. You're not even going to hear so much that people were protesting against what they perceive as a stolen election. You're just going to hear it as Trump incited a riot.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not gonna talk. But the government overreach, big tech, big media, are they gonna repeat? Are they gonna report on the fact that a bunch of CNN equipment got broken and bashed because they were rioting just as much against the big media that they think stole the election? In other words, they believe that it was the media that, being so one-sided in its coverage, was the stealing influence in the election. Some of them that don't get into the voting machines and all that stuff.
You think the media would report on how people don't have faith in them?
Right.
Especially CNN. CNN is another one that is just completely infiltrated by the intelligence community. They don't even hide it. They have on-air talent who are former heads of the CIA and NSA. Yet some Americans would still think that sounds conspiratorial when I say it. Do you see how reflexively insane that is?
Well, here's the thing. There's a difference between, I think there's people who believe it's primarily conspiracy, and then there's people like me who believe it's primarily incompetence. And
dude, I disagree. I absolutely disagree. I think that's such a great way to just so much stuff. Be like, oh, people can't get together and organize. It's like, no way, dude.
Well, here's the thing. This is what
the Great Reset. Look at the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Look at the Davos people. They meet every year. Business leaders, world leaders. What do you think? They're just there for the fucking handies? No, they meet there together with prominent members of the media, with prominent members of academia, and they plot the fucking course. And now they are using this pandemic to accelerate techno fucking fascism. And it's going to be initially more accessible with the 5th generation of telecom, with 5G, because of the bandwidth that allows for the Internet of Things to come on board, for further use of AI, and for the beginnings of transhumanism, which is connecting of people with machines. The first industrial revolution is known as being steam. The second industrial revolution is electricity. The third industrial revolution is the computers age, personal computers, and the fourth is the Internet of Things, is the connectivity of all of the devices, all of that shit. Right now, here's the thing: if we want to have a say in how this is going to be rolled out, and not let a bunch of unelected freak shows do it at our expense, so they get to control all of the world's resources and then dole them out to us as they decide, we really need to separate from these left-right divides.
I see what you're saying. Actually, you've gotten me to see the bigger picture, in the sense that when I was saying incompetence, I was talking about the media mostly. But what you're talking about is understanding where civilization is going. You know who talks about this a lot are the anarchists. And that's when you talk to anarcho-primitivists, when you talk to the other podcast I did before Unblocked was called Uncovered Anarchist. And I talked to anarchists across the country while I was kind of investigating all the anarchist tactics that were being used, not necessarily just by anarchists, more of this Antifa, anti-fascist, Black Lives Matter movement, social movement. But what I noticed was a lot of the classical anarchists talk about mass society. They call themselves anarcho-primitivists. They talk about devolution. I had an interesting conversation with Ward Churchill, who's this anarchist out of Atlanta. He's the one who was fired for writing a controversial essay about the World Trade Center, saying that essentially it was chickens coming home to roost.
I know who Ward Churchill is.
So I had a conversation with Ward Churchill. We were talking about the concept of devolution, that this isn't revolution, but from an anarchist point of view, it's devolution. Another anarchist named John Zerzan talked to me about when mass society, you can only do so much in mass society, and eventually you just hit this moment, and that's what it feels like for the left and the right. And what people may not be able to see, and some do, like you and me, very clearly, is that the concerns are actually the same. The anarchists have the same concern as the patriots, which is they don't want government in their lives like this, or techno, what did you call it? Techno-fascism. And they're railing against big tech. And in some ways, the reason they gravitate towards Trump is the truth doesn't matter to them. They say we want our freedom, and that's more important than the truth. So we'd rather have this guy just shit posting. This is what I've called Donald Trump is the shit poster in chief. That he's actually, some people say that we got a troll in the White House, but a shit poster is culturally more accurate. That he'll just say anything and the truth doesn't matter, because if we have the freedom to say it against all these other forces that be, then we'll take that any day. And I think that's the point of view of the right. And then the left has the same sort of fear of big, techno forces kind of coming in and mass society taking over. Go ahead.
Okay, I think that is a great insight, and that makes a lot of sense to me. I just wanted to say, somebody wrote in response to what I just said before you, they wrote, agreed, yes, but we need more compelling, less kooky sounding explanations. Like, fair enough, but I mean, that is what is happening. How, you know what I mean? Like, I guess I'm not saying that that you're wrong in that assessment. And then he wrote, how is this going to go mainstream? It's a good question, and the truth is I don't know. But what I do know is, if it sounds like groups like anarchist groups and patriot groups are both seeing this, while there's a whole swath of folks that are not, I really think it's important for those anarchist groups and those patriot groups, regardless of their left-right leanings, to get together. And I'm going to say the word we need to start organizing. We need to start doing something. We need to, at least, because I actually think what we need to do is set up parallel institutions. I actually don't think we can win against these groups electorally. We can't win against these groups in terms of the global momentum that they have. I think globally we need to separate and set up our own institutions. And one of those things that we'd have to do would be to set up our own financial structures, which means if they want to have blockchain UBI and they want to have cryptocurrency, we separate and we have our own that is more freedom-based compared to control-based and centralized. They want to have decentralized blockchain, centralized digital currency, which is so fucking sickening to me. And I think we need, in so many ways, to set up parallel institutions. And goodness gracious, they are up to really, really gnarly shit. And this is not me. This is me just sort of assimilating a number of journalists and independent researchers who have done the heavy lifting on this.
Well, I'll have to look into that. And, thanks for being on for this conversation. And I'm going to show you one thing before we go. This says cleaning our. This I took this from the Capitol. It was on a door of one of the two offices they were ransacking. And so I got a shot of the live stream of this on the door. It said cleaning not required. And they were just ransacking these offices. They were taking the chairs and they were breaking the chairs apart and using them as like weapons, if they were going to, so that they had something in their hands. At one point I got sliced with by glass, and I wiped my hand on one of the couches, which was
crazy. I will tell you, that's wild, and this is unprecedented times. But you know what? I do believe in, sadly, that violence begets violence, and violence is what the state knows how to do. We cannot beat them with violence. So the pushback against this, whatever the response to this is going to be, it's not going to be something where we're going to be high-fiving ourselves. We can't get them with violence. It just doesn't work. So yeah, that's where I'm at with that.
I want to say that this group they made their statement. I'm calling them anarcho-patriots from now on, because that's what it felt like to me, was a kind of anarcho-patriotism. They want to get back,
I like that, because that brings the two groups together.
Yeah.
You know, at least in name. Anarcho-patriots, dude. Fuck it. I'll be in a fucking anarcho-patriot. Why the fuck not? Whatever. I want to show you this real quick. And I also think for these folks today, this was a purge. This was like they've been fucking dealt such a shitty hand, dealing with so much from their perspective, that this was there, and watching the left do this shit all since May. So it's like this was their fucking purge of these. They exercise the demons, you know.
Well, think of how they've been, characterized for the last 4 years. As each and every one of them are supposedly white supremacists, and they're bigots, and all this stuff, and they're sick of it, and they came out because they are patriotic. They do love this country. At the end of the day, they didn't want to see the Capitol burn, but they were coming in to make a statement, and that the people who were inside were so freaked out, and somebody shot and killed somebody. It says volumes. I've never seen anything like this. I've covered a lot of stories, and to be on the ground today in that crowd, and then to go into the offices when they hoisted me up, because we literally were climbing up walls and going into windows and stuff. I mean, it was
unbelievable experience, man.
Yeah. And I was in there, and, as I said, I cut my hand on the glass going through, because we were going through broken windows and stuff. And they were just ransacking. One guy was trying to put the Mac away. There was a widescreen Mac display, and he was trying to get that packed up. I don't think he got it out, because pretty soon the gas came in, and we had to go out. It was Virginia State Police in the end. Virginia State Police were letting off flashbangs and corralling us, and they got us all out of there. People are saying the preferential treatment argument. Somebody said there needs to be more proof that there's preferential treatment from the right. The thing is the right.
The Capitol Police shot a woman in the neck and she died. It doesn't seem like preferential treatment.
Exactly. They, exactly. And they don't understand also how rickety it was up there, the scaffolding, how you had tens of thousands of people that were, if there was if it had gotten even any worse, more people could have died. But I think that crowd held it together in a way, in a sense that I don't know. There's a different feeling, as I said, when you're in a rightist crowd and a leftist crowd. The leftist crowd, you feel like the crowd itself can turn on you at any time. That's my feeling,
Check it out, dude. As anarcho-patriots, we need to know who our enemy is, all right? And I'm telling you, it's the guy that wrote this fucking book right here. COVID-19, The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab. And here's his underling, Terry Mallory or whatever. But Klaus Schwab is the chairman of the World Economic Forum, and he wrote this book all about the Great Reset. And he's such a hilarious, perfect, villainous figure. He's this 82-year-old bald German dude with a thick accent who's like, now is the time. We need the Great Reset. You can't even make this shit up. So I'm actually working on a comedic web series about him. I am, because he did COVID-19, The Great Reset. So my web series is called COVID-1984, The Great Reset. It's great. And the slogan is going to be, it's going to be Tony the Tiger going, it's great, but instead of his like one figure, it's going to be like a Sig Heil. You know what I mean?
Wow.
I'm not fucking around, but because look, this is source material.
Comedy with John. Yeah, I should explain to people before we get pounced on that John is a comedian. I know John from comedy. I also go by Kenji, and I used to do comedy back in the day. And
I've been doing stand-up for 20 years. I was on the political satire comedy show Redacted Tonight. So that is my first love. But I like to do political comedy, and this is some more source material. Discrete Power, How the World Economic Forum Shapes Market Agendas. This is by two professors from the University of Stockholm. That's how much of a fucking nerd I am. But yeah, so basically this is stuff I'd love to go over with you and get your take on,
Yeah, we'll talk about the, creative content at some point, because certainly there's a lot going on, a lot to tap into. To everybody who joined us on this podcast, thank you for coming. You're a clownfish. Hey, you're funny. Okay.
Wait, can I plug my podcast?
Yeah,
people?
plug your podcast. I
Okay.
loved your last episode, by the way, with the journalist from Gray. What was it? Gray
The Gray Zone Project.
Gray
Yeah.
Zone Project.
Hill. She's really great. Yeah, if you guys are interested in, I saw some people mention Whitney Webb a few times. I love Whitney Webb. I think she's a great journalist. Other journalists you may not know about who are also great. They do stuff for the Gray Zone, and that's Gray with an A. And Anya Parampil is one aside. So what I want to say is I have a podcast that uses comedy to destigmatize mental health issues, because I think that's important as well. It's called Take Your Pills Psychopath. If you guys want to check that out, wherever you check out podcasts.
All right. John F. O'Donnell, good pal of mine from my comedy days when I did my Kenji comedy. You guys have been listening to the Unblocked podcast. This has been a special live edition, Capitol Hill edition of Unblocked podcast. Check out publicreport.org for everything that's been going on under the cover of protests since the end of May. I'm Jeremy Lee Quinn. And also, we'll see you at the next one. And everybody stay safe. And thanks for joining us. Bye-bye. Peace.